All right, we'll get started. I wanted to say, first of all, that I'm absolutely thrilled and honored to get to share this space with three wonderful writers who I've admired for a long time. And I'm going to make a few administrative observations first. My name is Rivka Galchen. Before we begin, I want to let you know that books by the authors in this program can be purchased from Greenlight Bookstore outside Borough Hall on the plaza, and that the authors are going to be signing their books immediately following the panel at this space just out there in the rotunda. At the conclusion of the program, you can meet them at the signing table. So that is it. So thank you for coming this afternoon to Breaking Out, Women and Girls on Their Own Terms. The event of this panel is 3 different books and 3 different writers. Mona Eltahawy, The 7 Necessary Sins for Women and Girls. Ambai, A Kitchen in the Corner of the House, and Téa Obreht, Inland. To bring all 3 of these women bring to life strong female voices of the past and present, from Eltahawy's powerful Me Too manifesto to Obrecht's reimagining the American West with the tale of an unflinching frontierswoman, to Ambai's courageous characters grappling with motherhood, self-assertion, and sexuality. All 3 writers address issues of confinement and liberation in face of larger cultural and historical forces. Why don't we begin, actually, just so you can get a sense of the tone of the works. Let's have the writers read a passage from their books, and I'll actually introduce them after the passages, because I think it's kind of nice to hear the work as freshly as possible. So, Ambai, would you mind going first?
I'm going to read 2 very small passages from 2 of my stories. The first passage is the end of a long story where 3 friends from 3 different backgrounds, how they are part of the women's movement and how they get separated at one point. And one of them has written a letter to a small girl, a small baby actually, and they find it in her private papers after her death. And I'm reading the last passage of that story. And the second one is from a story called Fish in a Dwindling Lake. And it's the story of, again, 2 friends, a friend who has chosen to teach, and another one who has set up what we in India call an ashram, and where she is trying to educate underprivileged children. And I've taken a small passage of their conversation with each other. The woman who has chosen to teach is a widow, and the other person, she has decided to remain single and educate the underprivileged children. So I'm reading from the first story. I'm sorry, I don't have a very good voice, and I'm going to read in my Indian accent, and you have to accept it. You have no choice. Okay. The little baby's name is Roshni. Roshni means light in Hindi. Roshni, light. I have strung together for you 50 years of doubts, rebellions, battles, struggles. This is only a song. When I write an epic for you, and I'll write it one day, I will speak of all this in detail. But don't think that the song is complete. It is true that communal violence, caste wars, and human degradation have all dispirited us greatly. but our battle continues. We still raise our voices to safeguard rivers, trees, and animals, to safeguard human beings above all. You will hear in this song resonances of our joy, despair, disappointments, and exhilaration. Sleep well, Roshni, and when you wake up, let it be to the sound of our song. You and I and many others must complete it, for we believe that a song once begun ought to be completed. This from the second story. As if she were continuing with an argument which started somewhere sometime, she asked, Bimla, in the end, it is the pain that is the truth. Isn't that so? It too is the truth. You always denied the body. Now see, all that is left is the body. Who denied the body? You did. I lost mine because of the decisions made by all kinds of others. But the body alone is certain, the truth. You denied the truth. The body is urine, shit, blood. Its desires, hunger, and thirst are all truths. It isn't quite like that, Kumud, Vimla said gently. The body has several aspects to it. Its appearance, its everyday functions may seem to be common experience, but the truth of each individual body will be different from anyone else's. The body is indeed an anchorage, but each body casts anchor in a different sea. Everything eternal, everything external, trees and plants, creepers, forests, beasts, all of it is the body. Only the body. Without the body, there is nothing. Everything is through the body. You can keep on stretching the boundaries and limits of the body. It will accept everything, contain everything. It will be able to mingle with everything. Once more, her face was bathed in sweat. Kumud wiped it away.
So I was going to give you a little context. Ambai is a feminist Tamil writer who grew up in Bangalore and Mumbai, and her story collections include In a Forest, A Deer, Fish in a Dwindling Lake, A Meeting on the Andheri Overbridge, The Purple Sea, A Night with a Black Spider, and her most recent collection, which you read from today. She also is a researcher and an educator and a commentator, and her articles have appeared in The Hindu, The Times of India, and the Political Weekly. Maybe Téa will read us a passage next.
Sure. Thank you so much. So just for context, this novel is it's called Inland, and it follows two narrative lines. The first is set in the 1850s, and it follows a young man who is brought over to the United States by his father from the Balkans, from what is at the time part of the Ottoman Empire. And he has a series of misadventures that lead him to become an outlaw and shelter within the United States Camel Corps, which is a real thing that happened in the 1850s, which I didn't know about until I did the research for this book. The United States military brought camels over from the Ottoman Empire to serve as pack animals in the Southwest. The other storyline, which sort of races to converge with the first, concerns Nora, and she's a frontierswoman living in Arizona territory in 1893. And she lives in a small town called Amargo. Her husband is the newspaper man of that town, and they've been experiencing a really, really terrible drought. And so this is a small passage from sort of early on in the book. She and her son have just been down in the gulch near their home, where the creek has dried out, and in the creek bed, her son has seen what he thinks are tracks. And so they're coming out of the gulch now. Back at the top of the gulch, Toby stopped. "Where's the dogs, Mama?" She was hot and out of breath, and she didn't know. But his question had finally flushed out the strange sense of absence that had goaded her all morning. It wasn't just that her sons had already fared off, or that her husband Emmett's ongoing delay had forced her to brace for yet another wretched, waterless day. No, there had been something else, too, something under or around it all, and now it struck her. The dogs. The dogs were gone. 4 of them, possibly 5, if that old amorous one had survived his latest dalliance with whatever coyote bitch had most recently turned his head. Their din, feral and ungovernable as they were, sounding off from every corner of the farm at every hour of the day and driving Emmett to empty threats of execution, was her constant companion, and in its absence stretched a stillness so vast that the small music of the grasses could not rise to fill it. "Your brothers must have taken them," Nora said. "Where?" She thought about it. "Hunting?" For the first time all day, Toby laughed. "Mama," he said, "how silly." He went on ahead of her toward the house. It sat against the bluff with the melted sun at its windows and a black cloud, the telltale sign of Josie's fried eggs on the make, sieving through every crack around the door. Of late, Nora had found herself envisioning what might become of the place when her family, too, played out. When Rob, his patience overdrawn, finally joined some northbound cattle drive, and her son Dolan lucked into an apprenticeship, perhaps with God's mercy under the benevolent hand of some patient judge, and her husband Emmett inevitably got his way, abandoned the newspaper, and bundled Nora and Toby and his own ancient mother into the wagon and set course for his next venture in some nameless camp, if there still existed such a thing in this world. The house would fall silent. Mice, having prospected every last crumb, would nest in the eaves. Rattlesnakes would follow. The scrub oaks with their thirsty roots would wander down the hill, creeping by and by over the jack fence and over Evelyn's little headstone and down toward the outbuildings. The yard would go to seed, all those hard-fought grasses returning in their prickly mats to outman the descendants of Nora's cabbages. Perhaps a late summer storm might blow the barn down. Perhaps a prickly pear, small and round, would begin its slow ascent through the floor in one of the downstairs rooms. Soon some quiet autumn evening would find the farm just another massif of slanted roofs, and the lightless windows would draw some desperate neighbor to probe their well, as she and Emmett had done when the Floreses, Rodrigo and Selma, and Toby's little friend, Valeria, had pulled up stakes last year without warning, gone without goodbye, as was the custom of surrender. Thank you.
Téa Obreht is author also of The Tiger's Wife, which was the winner of the 2011 Orange Prize for Fiction. That novel was an international bestseller that sold over 1 million copies worldwide. And she was born in Belgrade in the former Yugoslavia in 1985 and has lived in the United States. I know she's only like 11 years old. So, since the age of 12, which is tricky with the math. She currently lives in New York City and she teaches at Hunter College. Mona, we'd love to hear a passage from you.
I wrote this book with enough rage to fuel a rocket. I knew I had to write it while I was still high on the glory of beating up a man who had sexually assaulted me. Who was this woman I had become, who looks men in the eye, seizing their gaze with my fury, until their fear tells me they understand not to fuck with me? I wanted to figure her out. For years, I had been shedding shame and gaining fury. For years, I had been thumping away at patriarchy like a piñata hanging tantalizingly just out of reach. It was stubborn, but my tenacity and ferocity became my ladder. This book is my instruction manual for smashing that piñata. This is a moment for those who are not rich, white, or famous to be heard. It is a moment in which we must have a reckoning with patriarchy and in which we recognize how normalized its crimes are, as well as a reckoning with how it intersects with other forms of oppression like racism, classism, ableism, homophobia, transphobia, and bigotry. I am from many worlds and I travel between many places. Throughout this book, I will share voices and stories from across the world about the ways women and queer people yell a big fuck you to the patriarchy. Words like feminism and resistance are being drained of their meaning when we offer them up as band-aids that offer temporary relief to women and girls against the vagaries of patriarchy. I have had enough of giving women and girls ways simply to survive, rather than tools to fight back. The danger and fear that should emanate from feminism and resistance must not be stamped out. Feminism should terrify the patriarchy. It should put patriarchy on notice that we demand nothing short of its destruction. We need fewer roadmaps towards a peace treaty with patriarchy and more manifestos on how to destroy it. The 7 necessary sins for women and girls is my manifesto. I have written this book for a global audience of feminist revolutionaries. The United States is not the center of the feminist universe. But the US behaves like it's the center of all universes, and the world pays it a lot of attention. And having lived in the United States since 2000, I have learned the denial that many white Americans succumb to when it comes to gender issues. Many white Americans will confidently tell you that it's shit over there for women, meaning anywhere but the US, but too often concentrating on Muslim-majority countries. And in the same breath, be thankful that you live over here. Such denial only serves to strengthen patriarchy and to hurt those most affected by patriarchy and the myriad oppressions it allies with: women of color, working class and poor women, disabled women, and queer and trans women. There is an unjustified overconfidence among white American women, especially about the achievements of feminism and what it shielded them from. Few women around the world share the delusions of white American women about the achievements of feminism. Such overconfidence is one of the reasons that white American women finally began to be angry after Trump was elected. Where have they been? The fact that it took Trump to finally ignite white women's rage, not including the 47% who voted for him, and not the decades of misogyny, racism, bigotry, and other forms of discrimination that led to it, is a reminder of how privileged and sheltered white American women have been from the injustices that ignite rage in black women and girls, and for which they are punished and stereotyped. Those white women have allowed their race to trump their gender, believing that their docility, compliance, and allegiance to white supremacy will protect them from the ravages of patriarchy that the rest of us experience. They are what I call foot soldiers of the patriarchy. White women have the most privilege of expressing anger and are the last to express it, because they are sheltered from so much that ignites anger in the rest of us. Then, when white women finally found their anger, it's considered a revolution, when in reality, they are finally catching up to the revolution of rage that swept up the rest of us.
Thank you. Mona Eltahawy is an author, activist, and commentator, an amazing reader. Her latest book is The 7 Necessary Sins for Women and Girls. Her essays and op-eds have appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Guardian, Time, NBCnews.com, and New York Magazine, among many others. I was thinking a little bit about some of the common threads in your work, which is quite disparate, and one is the centrality of the body. And I kind of was going to ask you guys a little bit about like where that starts for you, connecting the sort of the body and the bodily experience to the page. Like Mona read a passage very like beginning putting pen to paper from an assault. I know that in different ways in other sections of Inland as well, it's like Nora's fate and destiny are very specifically tied to her as a woman in the West. And Ambai read a detailed, almost sensual passage about the body. And I guess I'm kind of curious, it's almost like an act of translation. And if I was curious to hear you guys think a little bit about translating a physicality, a body and space into words, another form of communication. Or any of you could start.
I'll go in first.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, the body is absolutely central to my writing and the work that I do, because one of the themes that connects this book and my first book, Headscarves and Hymens, Why the Middle East Needs a Sexual Revolution, is this very simple statement: I own my body. I own my body is the revolution, because I own my body says not the state, not the street, not the home, not the family or the church or the mosque or wherever someone worships or doesn't worship. I own my body. And from that streams everything else, because it's about consent and agency, and the revolution is at its heart about consent and agency. But then there's, throughout the book, what I do with the various sins, some of the sins are more to do with the body, like the sin, the so-called sin of lust, in which I examine the centrality of queerness and the centrality of using that declaration, I own my body, to challenge patriarchy through the chaos and liberation of desire and pleasure expressed in a very queer way. But then there's also the body in the sin of violence, and my insistence that we have the right to fight back against patriarchy using violence because of this constant backdrop of violence that women and girls are subjected to. So the body is absolutely central to all the work that I've done and continue to do.
And Ambai, I know you have some of the stories in this collection touch on characters in a revolutionary setting, or at least a setting of political turmoil, mostly in the past in this collection, and how that does or doesn't end up working out for them the way they think it will, or that the politics does or doesn't deliver them or alter their physical situation, their domestic situation.
Yeah, but I look at the body very differently, because I feel that to say that all women's bodies are similar is also a mistake, because we have in our tradition many women who have been wandering around singing. There have been women saints who have looked at the bodies very differently, and there are people who have denied the body. What we grow up in our everyday life, what we grow up with is a way we are wandering in a bodiless space, because body is never spoken about in the family. You never talk about menstruation. It's just not talked about. So I wrote a story about a girl coming of age, and when she comes of age, suddenly she realizes that there is this body she has to deal with, and there is no one to tell her how to deal with. She has to find her own way of doing it. And it also takes a long time to come out of different definitions of the body and arrive at your own definition. Because when you see a woman's body as a singular, unifocal body, then you deny it time and history, because there is no body that is not touched by time and history. And every woman's body is touched by time and history differently. So it's not as if all women's bodies are only dealing with one particular oppressor or enemy or something. We have different ways of dealing with the body, and we have different ways of dealing with the spaces that the body occupies. I always tell one instance of, there was an Alsatian dog in our house, and it was not allowed inside the kitchen. And the dog was very fond of my mother. So what it used to do was put its entire body in the kitchen and leave out only the hind legs and the tail, And it used to pretend that it was not inside the kitchen, I feel that many Indian women did that. They pretended that they were observing all the rules, but they had their own ways of breaking it, It's not as if in the 80s the women's movement came and started a revolution. I feel that women like my mother and grandmother, they did their own ways of defining their spaces. So they also define their bodies differently.
Téa, I was curious. Yeah. Téa, I was curious to ask you a little bit about, I know the character of Nora in Inland is not based on your grandmother. Your grandmother didn't grow up in the American West or spend time there, but I know that conversations with your grandmother about her experiences, which you didn't learn about until relatively late, is that right, informed your ability to write the character of Nora, who goes through, it's funny, when I was reading the book, I was thinking about how difficult it is to read and for that matter, write a scene in which something terrible happens specifically to a woman or a child, and how that can be made not sexy and seductive, since there's a lot of ways in which writing about violence against women can be done terribly. So I guess I wanted to hear from you a little bit about that process, that transformation from stories in reality and how they changed into the stories in Inland.
Yeah, thank you. So my grandmother was born in Mostar in the early 30s. She was a Bosniak Muslim. She grew up in a butcher's household, one of 6 kids, and had a very, very difficult upbringing. One of the things, I knew all about her life, like learning about it wasn't news. What was news to me was toward the end of her life, she became extremely open about rage that she felt about her upbringing, about the loss of her 2 children, about the congenital heart defect with which she had grown up and despite which she had made it to the age of 80, which was like a shock to everyone because her parents just pulled her out of school, you know. Counting on the fact that she was going to have a premature death. And I realized for the first time that it wasn't that her rage was growing now, it's that she had spent her entire life setting up a barrier between us and that rage. And that even though she loved her husband and she loved her family, there was a lot of things that she had been silent about. And I think that I was beginning to write Inland at the time, and that became the sort of foundational, the backbone of Nora's character, which is that she's not silent about it in her own mind. And I think that the first place where her sort of psychological state meets the outside world is through this threat of violence. You know, and sometimes that is an imagined threat. And sometimes it's a very real threat from which all her instincts and impulses go. She, in her interactions with anybody, first passes through this veil of rage and directly into the teeth of confrontation, I think, and which is a thing that is socially unacceptable, right? Like an angry woman, as you said, like an angry woman is
a sin.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, yeah.
I'm also kind of curious, especially since there's like writing across very different genres, sometimes sort of polemical nonfiction writing, sometimes sort of memoiristic writing, and fiction. What is it that sort of helps you solve whether certain thoughts get turned into a story or get turned into a manifesto? I'm curious whether that's something conscious, whether it's about the different audiences that you're addressing, or whether it's about just finding words to say something. How you make that decision on those different things, or if it's a decision that's somehow made for you.
I have mainly written fiction, and when I was very young, I tried poetry, like most young girls do, but it was very bad poetry, and I knew it, so I didn't have it published. I kept it in my diaries. These were poems written by a young teenager. But when I was 16, I wrote an adventure novel for children, and it won a prize. And when I was 19, I wrote a novel, which I never wrote a novel again. After that, I went into short stories. The novel was about platonic love. And it's not unusual that I should have written about platonic love, because I did not know anything about love at that age because I had never gone out with anyone. Nor did I know about the body. So it was very easy to write about platonic love. And I also did a lot of wonders of separating the mind and body. And there was this idealistic man who had a wife, so the wife was the body. And he had another idealistic woman who was in love with him. And there are dialogues like where she says that I offer you my mind and not offer you my soul and not my body and things like that. But when you write like that, either you should have had the maturity to transcend the body, or you should be ignorant of the body. In my case, the latter was the truth. I knew nothing about the body even to transcend it. So writing a fiction about platonic love was easy for me. It won a prize, that's a different matter. But whenever I felt like writing non-fiction, it has always been my research work or the articles I write. And basically, fiction for me is an area where I try to understand relationships, life, and I feel basically literature is about the author's relationship with what she perceives as truth. And literature is not about telling one truth, because there are so many different kinds of truth. And the truths keep changing at different points of our life. Because it's not one truth we grow up with and live till we die. So what we perceive as truth of life keeps changing. And I feel that it is this relationship that literature is. And I find it easier to say it in a fictional format because it allows a lot of spaces for subtlety where we don't have to say anything loud and clear. When I want to say that, I write articles or I write research books.
Yeah, because you also are the director of Sound and Picture Archive for Research on Women in India, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And Mona, I know that you also, besides your writing, am I wrong, that you have on your body, you actually have some stories from your life that you write on your body. So I was curious if you could talk about that a little bit for us.
Sure. I mean, my decision of what to write is usually, or quite often, a result of something that some man has pissed me off about something, and it's just a consequence of that. And it's how this book began. Because you mentioned assault earlier, and the book began, or I got the idea for the book, when I heard that a young Pakistani woman called Sabika Khan had posted on Facebook about being sexually assaulted in Mecca, which is the holiest site for Muslims in Saudi Arabia. And she was performing pilgrimage, which is the fifth pillar for Islam. And a very similar experience had happened to me in 1982 when I was 15 years old and my family had just recently moved to Saudi Arabia. And we went on Hajj, the fifth pillar of our religion, and I was sexually assaulted twice. And at that time, when I was 15 years old, I burst into tears, I froze, I couldn't speak about it. It's a very natural and quite frequent reaction when women freeze and there's very little we can do about sexual violence. So I wanted to, it took me years to talk about it, but I finally began to write about it, and I mentioned it in my first book and given interviews about it. And I wanted to show solidarity with Sabika. So I began a hashtag #MosqueMeToo, to show solidarity with Sabika, but also to claim a space for more women within Me Too. Because Me Too that was begun by black feminist activist Tarana Burke in 2006, in 2017 had taken on a more popular aspect, if you like, when more white, wealthy, well-known, famous Hollywood actresses began to speak, courageously so. I'm not diminishing their courage. But Me Too began to be associated with this very rich, privileged, white kind of movement, which it never was meant to be. So I began #MosqueMeToo as a way of claiming space for women of Muslim descent. And then 5 days after I began it, I was at a club dancing with my beloved, this queer club in Montreal, and this guy sexually assaulted me, and I was like, you've got to be fucking kidding me. I'm now 50 years old and I'm still being sexually assaulted, and this time around I'm in a tank top and jeans. In 1982 I was in hijab. So I began another hashtag I beat my assaulter. And very soon after that, a male editor, a white male editor, for whom I used to freelance, insisted that I stop saying fuck on Twitter, because I don't know if you picked up, but I say fuck a lot. And I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe this man was more concerned with my language than the violence that my language was describing. And that's why there's a sin of profanity. Because I insist that the real profanity is the violence that women and girls are subjected to. Patriarchy is the real profanity, and not the language that I use to reject patriarchy. So those are three. So I began hashtag why I say fuck. So thank you for all the men who piss me off in my life. But the words that are on my body were a consequence or an inspiration of another assault, and now that Egypt is kind of, you're seeing protests in Egypt again. In November of 2011, during the year of revolution, Egyptian riot police beat me, broke my left arm, broke my right hand. I was sexually assaulted and I was threatened with gang rape. And I was detained by the Interior Ministry and by military intelligence. And both my arms were in a cast for 3 months, and I'm a writer, so that was like confinement. And I promised myself that when my bones healed, not when my heart healed, because I'm not sure my heart has fully healed, but when my bones healed, I would dye my hair red, because red is a fierce color and says, fuck you, you did not break me, I'm alive, and I'm not hiding. And I would get tattoos on both my arms, because they were markings of my own choosing. So I have the ancient Egyptian goddess Sekhmet. She's the goddess of retribution and sex, and I say yes, please, to both. And on my left arm, I have the name of the street in Cairo where I was assaulted during this iconic protest, and the Arabic word for freedom, Hurriya.
I have a lot of questions, but I thought it would be more fun to at least give a chance to open it up to the audience. And if the audience feels shy, I'll run things. But I did want to open it up to the audience for any questions for any three of the authors, or either directed at one of them or more generally.
Yes, absolutely. So the question was about how and whether the book sort of takes on or addresses the genocide perpetrated against Native Americans in the foundational moments of this country. Yes, it does. It's interesting. The book is based on real history. And so the structure of it was set by that particular history, and I knew from the beginning that there would have to be two narratives that were heading to intersect. One being this 40-year trek of this young Bosnian outlaw, and the other a person whose story was told in a single day, who was waiting for this convergence. Given those parameters, and given the fact that I did not want to co-opt Native narratives, what I found myself facing was the fact that I would have to contend with Nora in particular, but also Luri's culpability in matters of genocide. And I think that, part of the way that myths persist and the way that they continue to be pervasive, especially sort of large nation-building myths of heroic variety, which is what, which is how the West was won, is in denying personal culpability and sort of ascribing it to like, oh, well, that was history. And so one of the things I didn't want to shy away from was I didn't want to make my characters the good guys. So related with the myth of Native American violence and with racism itself are central to the decisions that the characters make in the book. So there's not a point of view Native American character in the book. I didn't feel right about doing that. However, it's central to many of the things that happen and many of the things that all the characters perpetrate in the narrative, if that makes sense. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, more women in this country are delaying marriage, and so I'm just wondering, given that, is marriage still a patriarchal institution, and you can talk about generally, or in the country that you're from?
Is this directed at me?
All for you.
All of us.
All
Okay.
three. Or all four of them.
He's sort of saying in this country, anyways, that the age of marriage keeps being delayed, and he's sort of like inviting us to talk a little bit about, is marriage still a patriarchal institution? Am I paraphrasing you?
Yeah, and it could be not just marriage in general, or in this country,
Yeah.
however you want to talk about it.
Well, in India now things are very, very different. Even in arranged marriages, I think the girl and the boy meet and they decide, they talk about, but the age of marriage, it can be anything. I got married when I was 32, which is considered very late in India. And I don't think that anyone had any objection to that, except that I married someone not from South India. I am from the south of India, but my husband is from the north of India. And the North Indian culture is very different from South Indian in terms of food and behavior and everything. So that was a kind of worrying thing for my parents, although I had left home when I was 19. So I don't think that they thought I can't deal with it. So it was perfectly okay. And it's not, the age of marriage is not something that is just for girls in India, even for boys. Like if a man doesn't get married at a particular time, then they say that his chances of getting a good girl for marriage are kind of over, Like my husband was also 32 when he got married. And he wasn't planning to get married at all, and nor was I. And in his family, they kept saying that you're postponing your marriage so much, you're not going to get a good girl anymore, And when he finally chose me, they were not so convinced that I was the good girl he should marry. So there were all these doubts about marriage. But more and more, there are situations, even in modern young girls, who would prefer to have an arranged marriage, because they are not able to choose among the friends they move with. So they feel that the parents may take a better decision. And it's not arranged in the sense that the girl doesn't know who the boy is or anything. They meet a few times and they decide. And there is not any fixed age, but basically they say that between 25 to 30 is a good age for the boys and girls to get married. But that's only a notion. Nobody is sticking to that. But if you see the wedding matrimonial advertisements in Indian newspapers, they'll make a separate story by themselves. They always say that wanted, educated, home-loving girl. I don't know what they mean by that. And soft-spoken is the best thing they advertise for. Wanted, educated, home-loving, soft-spoken girl. But she should be a working girl. That also they want, So they want such a combination of a girl for marriage. And the boys also, they say, and when they mention girls, they also say wanted fair were educated, and sometimes they mention convent educated, which means our English must be good. And where the boys are concerned, they always say wanted tall, handsome, with a 4-figure salary for a girl educated, and so on. So these are the very materialistic expectations in these kind of advertisements. But what finally happens is when the boy and girl meet and they decide whether they should really. The old-fashioned thing of the boy's parents coming and seeing the girl and all that is, it doesn't exist anymore. Nobody comes to see the girl and ask her to sing a song and things like that. But the arranged marriage system has not completely gone away. It's there.
Okay, when I mentioned that, I forgot something really important about what happened in that club I mentioned in Montreal. Because after that guy grabbed my ass, I found him, I tracked him down, I tugged at his shirt, he fell, I sat on top of him, and I beat the fuck out of him. And after I beat him up, and it was glorious, by the way, the club manager asked me what happened, and I explained to him what happened, and he turned to my beloved, and he asked me, why didn't you let your husband take care of it? So many things came out of that conversation, including half this fucking book. I said to him, first of all, he's not my husband. Second of all, this is my body. I own this body, and if someone assaults this body, I'm going to take care of it. So this is by way of paving the way to the chapter on lust and to answering your question. Yes, marriage is a patriarchal institution. I was very briefly married. It was one of the biggest mistakes of my life, and it's never going to happen again. I have told this beloved, there are two reasons that will make me break up with you. If you ask me to marry you and if you convert to Islam. Either one of those and I will break up with you. So, but it's not just the institution of marriage that I'm rejecting. I'm also rejecting heteronormativity. I'm also rejecting mononormativity. I am not monogamous. I'm rejecting a whole host of normativities that patriarchy has socialized us in. So I'm not really interested in how old or young people are when they get married, unless of course it's, child rape that goes by the words child marriage, which by the way is legal in this country in all but 2 states. Children, especially girls, can be married in this country. What I am interested in is in upending those normativities that we're socialized in. Now, I say all of this as well because my chapter on lust has a very queer focus. And I say this recognizing that those of us who do not abide by all those normativities are punished. And the only kind of lifeline that we're given is marriage so that our relationship and plural can be recognized. So we are not in that world yet in which same-sex couples can have equal rights unless they enter into this institution. We are not in that world yet in which those of us who choose not to be monogamous and we want to have multiple partners, we are not in that world in which these kind of relationship forms that we have are recognized. And that's the world that I want. And that's much, much further than what is the age of marriage, because that's much further than equality, because that question is at its heart asking me, when are we going to achieve equality between men and women? Because I'm interested in something much greater than equality. Equality is not enough. It's too late for equality. I want freedom, because I don't want to be equal to someone who is not free, and most men are not free.
So I think that we actually are wrapping up for time, and that was a beautiful way to end. I wanted to thank all of you guys for your work and for your time today as well. Thank you.